Mooney stood here and accused me of being Brady. This essay will refute that calumny. It's called Our Lives Matter. That's A-R-E, question mark. For this essay, I have found it necessary to adopt a pseudonym. More really, a new identity. No, check that. For this essay, I find it expedient to erase my current identity without committing to an alternative. Outside this essay, I am a middle-class white male living in the Rust Belt of Ohio. I am 60 years old, with no particular credentials to address the issues that choke my Facebook feed. I have not been murdered or illegally detained by the police. I have not been raped with a nightstick or sandbagged in the kidneys until I coughed blood. I have not been sleep deprived or coerced or economically discomfited. No Mickeys have been slipped, no dime bags planted. I have not been marginalized. No one in my family has been constrained. My encounters with the U.S. authorities, the public urinations, the busking, the beer heists, the drunk driving, the bar fights, the flag burnings, have all passed harmlessly into the personal mythology of my youth. I have been permitted to describe my own orbit around the American culture, which never outside this essay have I called the American culture, being so pervasive I have no name for it, as the Greeks had no name for religion or fish for water. But an essay from this source may be easily dismissed. It may seem fragile or defensive or microaggressive or triggering. And while I am often defensive, fragile, and macroaggressive, for the purposes of this essay, these attributes are counterproductive. This essay is about privilege. And who wants to read an essay about privilege by a pale-faced junior geezer from Ohio? I could, of course, pull a Rachel Dolezal, or better, a Yi Feng Chao, considering that print is more easily darkened than complexion. But I do not want to usurp an identity, just shed my own. For the purposes of this essay, and with the stipulation that outside the purview of this essay I retain all rights and prerogatives to my natal ID, I want to be no one. I foresee obstacles. First, it will be noted that the ability to shed identity temporarily without loss of rights and prerogatives is by nature a feature of privilege. Second, identity is so deeply inscribed, we suspect any polemic to which a brand does not adhere. Third, most attempts to shed identity merely adopt a new one or evade the question. See George Eliot, Ossian, H.D., A.E.I., Christ, Stalin, Prince, Basho, Captain Kangaroo, and Anonymous. Yet, hasn't everyone sometimes wanted to be no one? Not just someone else. Truly no one. Dickinson claimed to be nobody. Heine pined not to have been born. Shakespeare went to great lengths to conceal her Irish origins. The first to try was Odysseus, but even he couldn't pull it off. The strain of self-erasure was so great, he had to shout his name to the Cyclops, and you see where that got him. Maybe nobody can be no one. Maybe we're all locked into who we are. But then, what's the point? If we're all different and separate, and each individual reflects only a single predetermined point of view, why write? Just to validate other white geezers? I guess I could sell to AARP or Rotary, but I don't need the money. Tentatively, with deference, this essay proposes that somewhere in our core we yearn to believe that all humans are composed of the same stuff, and that in writing we transliterate the desire to address the no one who is both ourselves and others. Is such yearning fatuous, solipsistic? Maybe. But really, is it so hard becoming no one? It's been accomplished by 100 billion souls and counting. In fact, almost nobody fails to become no one almost immediately following their demise. For the few who linger, what do they retain? They resign non-salient skills. All those who passed before electronics lose voice and movement. Those who died before photography lose face. All lose affections. All lose futures. All lose the power of revision, though they themselves continue to be revised. Those who die without becoming no one comprise a special class. They are called history, and they are defined entirely by the living. Yet the living are shifty, themselves continually transitioning to no one. In all cases, dead identity is unsustainable. The further back we go, the more it's corrupted, from history to rumor and finally to myth. We know Einstein's hairdo and Mickey Mantle's bourbon, but Daniel Boone, Sappho, Zarathustra. Whatever achievements, accidents, crimes, or tragedies inspire the preservations of their names, in the ledger of the dead, only two features remain permanently indicted. The dead retain their gender, and they retain their race. And this raises a question. Not do black lives matter, nor do all lives matter, but rather, our lives matter? Do they consist of anything but? So I've talked myself out of wanting to be known even within the parameters of this essay. Even though it admits of only two classes, its readers and everyone else, this essay will not argue that it is not a privilege not to be detained without due process. It is not a privilege to be fairly treated in the workplace or to expect neighbors' respect. It is not a privilege for one's churches to remain unburnt, one's youths unharassed. This essay will not contend that even in the Greeks' religion and the fish's water, these are not privileges but rights. If rights are being denied an entire class of citizens, then this essay will not urge immediate action. This essay will remain silent on civilian review boards and community action committees. It will avoid issues of police militarization and unofficial apartheid. This essay will not decry further study. It will not sneer at heightening awareness. And under no circumstances will this essay revisit the ancestral row house where the Berrigans burned draft cards and Serpico unloaded and Malcolm X and Dr. King were murdered and a napalm girl screamed through the TV into our Queen's living room and I bared my eye teeth and flailed across the table from my father, an Irish cop whose eyes rolled back unbelieving because he was only an ocean and a generation from being a Fenian tig, and now we were all nearly Brits ourselves. This essay will not invoke my father's name, which outside this essay I have inherited, because without that invocation, he is no one. And since he is not formally subpoenaed, I can testify that never during those endless battles over the cooling meatloaf did my father utter a vulgarity or cast an aspersion on Negroes, that was their name then, no longer colored, not yet people of color. So when the American police rampage in Ferguson and Baltimore and Texas and Staten Island, I exhale hard against the inside of my skin, recalling that after strokes darkened his mind, but before he became no one, my father's impaired tongue spasmed words I had not known he knew. And I fear that beneath the fiction of our identity is not no one, but a vulcanized id, which his tireless will suppressed for 7 decades and has now erupted on the streets of America. And what will become of me? I am becoming old. Soon I will be no one, a transition with no bearing on this essay. But there is no denying that here, as everywhere else, I am white, though not as white as I once was. To feel fully white, one must be rare, as I was in Zaire when I was young, American, and definitely white. Despite the flip-flops, beads, fat-tired bikes, notwithstanding the dreads and wax hollandaise and lutuku binges and the ambling through the marché, we Coeur de la Paix goslings were whiter than we were anywhere else. Here were our privileges. less likely to be shot by militaires, more likely to be medevac if shot, less likely to be incarcerated, more likely to drink at the Caravia, less likely to starve, more likely to watch videos at the consulate, less likely to walk barefoot miles on end, more likely to be instructed to immediately vacate the scene of an accident, less likely to labor, more likely to get paid, less likely to die in infancy, more likely to be importuned by street urchins, less likely to know which interactions were affected by white privilege or to what degree, more likely to be imperfectly socialized on account of that ignorance, less likely to witness one's family dispersed and village razed and country torn apart by civil war, but most important, far, far more likely to leave. Not the nightly leave-taking of sleep, nor the final departure which nullifies all privilege. Whiteness entitled us to leave one place, to occupy another, where the first would still live in memory. When I was most white, everything was a dream I would wake from. Yet even there, I didn't feel completely white. Even though I had to look for confirmation no further than my own reflection. I didn't think, for instance, that departing the training center at the Bukavu Institut Supérieur Pédagogique to trek 1,000 miles by Camion to Goma and then 2-night ferry down Lake Tanganyika to catch the 60-hour train from Kalemi to Lubumbashi, where food and job and house and domestique awaited, meant that I was free as few were free, to dream and wake at the same moment, to live that double life where no one counts. So it did not seem particularly privileged to sneak off the boat in the Tanzanian town of Kigoma without visa or devise, armed only with the warning, boat leaves at nightfall. My first day on my own in Africa, I was alone in my own skin and felt at home on earth. I felt and did not feel all eyes following, and sensed and did not mind the bodies cresting around me, and saw but did not register the round clay huts and single brick steeple under the sun. I smelled the tang of palm oil smoked tilapia, and waved to the mamas sitting straight-legged, weaving baskets, and stopped to watch two men hoisting a skinned python on a pole, while around me kwashiorkor-bellied mtotos chanted, "Mzungu, Mzungu!" But this essay will not descend into history. History makes everyone rare. History is how whites colonized Africa. Speke and Burton and Mungo Park and Sir Roger Casement and Conrad all craved to be no one as they traipsed across the continent, scribbling a vibrant landscape into something menacing and dramatic, a setting for self-discovery. They were white, purely white, and that was the point. Only here, where everyone else was unwhite, could they plumb whiteness. Only here could they chart its features. Less likely to act as a group, more likely to make maps, less likely to believe that black lives matter, more likely to regard ahistorical lives as mere matter, less likely to be enslaved, more likely to export, less likely to sleep communally, more likely to use firearms, less likely to uncover their bodies, more likely to contract malaria, far, far, far more likely to leave. No wonder their books sold. Their diaries were history. And even though we've glimpsed the similar dynamics around the world, Unionist to Catholic, Klansman to African American, Tutsi to Hutu, Brahmin to Shudra, it was here in whiteness that the voyage to no one went farther than it had ever gone before. It meant then, and means now, living and dreaming at the same moment. It is the ghostly construct where lives are more than matter. History charms us into thinking we are no one while we are still here. So purely as exposition and with no pretense to history, this essay will note the shriek of boat whistle at 3 p.m. and register my dash to the dock from which the ferry steamed out on the lake toward the Zairian horizon. It will record the sniggering of navvies and the Tanzanian bobby's gap-toothed smile. Weak, Boat comes back in 1 week. It is difficult, but not impossible, to resist history. It requires careful attention to a painful truth. Beneath that week of escapades, the conniving with the Zairian consul, and the session with the Scottish missionaries, and the Bronx cheer to the Benedictine monks, and the larking with the boat boys, and the dickering under the moon with Jean, a commerçant who was deep into brokering a deal with diamond smugglers to repatriate me back across the lake by seaplane or motorboat or pirogue, was the purest privilege. But on the cusp of being no one, there are times when I give in. I close my eyes and feel the wind in my hair and hear the roar of the dilapidated jeep and brace for the next jolt across sunburnt miles, my second to last afternoon in Tanzania, heading inland away from the receding lake. And even within the confines of this essay, I fall into history. Why, I asked, but Jean just smiled and waved. Why are we going away? You'll know, you'll see, he said. It didn't matter. We were voyaging together. We were traveling uncharted roads into Africa. One day I would leave and everything would be transposed. Finally, we stopped, nowhere on the savannah, with nothing in sight as far as I could see. And they pointed toward the falling sun where one huge encumbrance heaved grotesquely out of the scorched clay. A baobab, whorled in bulbous knots and lichen, but bearing its own weight and leaves alive. My friends looked and looked, from baobab to me to baobab, and finally I asked, what about the boat? No boat today, Jean shrugged. Maybe tomorrow. The baobab might have been holy. They watched it so solemnly. We all watched together. Desert birds circled far overhead, and I recalled that a formateur in Bukavu had told us that the baobab was a phenomenon because inside its huge heft, the trunk was hollow, alive. It was composed inside entirely of air. This was their history, I thought. They would reveal it to me, and then it would be ours. Standing up in the jeep, in the searing African sun, living and dreaming at the same time, I thought it might belong to me too, and that I would pass on this history long after I left. What is the tree? I asked. Jean raised his arm and pointed. This is Ujiji, he said. Yes? That is the baobab. History says mango, but I heard baobab. That is the tree where Livingston met Stanley. What? I smuttered. Who? Dr. Livingston, I presume. Jean snapped a mock salute. I turned from Jean to the great tree and back. We came all this way to see Stanley and Livingston? Jean shrugged. We thought you whites must care about such things.